Welcome to Fully Booked, the bookish podcast where I'll chat about all things book and reading related. Whether you're new or a pro reader, there's something for everyone to learn. I'm here to help you on your reading journey and find that next great read that will keep you fully booked. Hello, readers, and welcome to episode 25 of Fully Booked. I'm your host, Natalie, and today's episode I thought it'd be great to go over some No to Little Spice author recommendations. In particular, if you're newer to the reading or romance world, you're probably slowly finding out the abundance and variety of books there are to read out there. And while there's a contingent of people recently who are heavily into the smut side of romance, there's another contingent, which includes myself, who are way on the other side of the spectrum, and this might also include yourself. I do want to mention, though, that I have read books all over the spice spectrum, and I typically don't heavily discriminate or avoid reading about it entirely, unlike some might. I think when it's written and handled in a certain way, with a bit more mystery, shall we say, it can actually enhance the story and relationship between our two characters, and that I can appreciate. However, when no aspect of what's happening is left to our imagination, I think that's when things can get iffy and potentially dangerous for some of us as readers. I know I have a bit of trouble handling spicier books even if I really like the rest of the story. So, it's always nice knowing you have a default list of authors you can turn back to when you need to cool down the heat, shall we say. So, I've made 3 different categories of authors in this episode to go through, depending on what genre/target demographic you like best. And I'm not really going to go through individual books, as I really wanted to focus more on authors and all the books they've written holistically. So with that in mind, let's get into some of my no spice author recs. Alright, so the first section that I'm going to start with in this episode is the YA romance authors. Now, it's safe to say that I have a lot of recommendations for YA, as in general, it tends to lean more towards no spice/closed door. Also, I probably should have clarified before that technically most of the authors I will be going through are closed door, not no spice. Besides YA, it's getting harder and harder to find no spice authors where absolutely nothing happens in the book, as even with YA books, there's usually at least one scene that implies what's about to happen, even if we don't go into all the full and graphic detail. Anyways, with that clarified, let's dive in, starting with Lynn Painter. So this was one of the first YA romance authors I discovered when I started getting back into reading in 2022 to 2023, particularly as I heard a lot of hype around Better Than the Movies. Not going to lie, I feel like I fed into the hype a bit much at the time of reading, as if I were to actually think back to the overall storyline, I think I would drop my rating from 5 to 4.25 to 4.5 stars. Don't get me wrong, I truly enjoyed this book when I read it at the time, but I'm now unsure if it's truly one of the most amazing romances I read overall, or even one of the most amazing books I read overall. What I will say though is that in addition to basically no spice, I put her books around 1 chili pepper, given that I only remember kissing happening in Better Than the Movies. But the way she writes scenes and dialogue in her stories makes it feel like you're watching a movie. I could definitely see Better Than the Movies being adapted, as it really gave me that early 2000s to 2010 feel when reading most of the book. And I have to say that the banter and dialogue in her books is top-notch for YA romance. However, unfortunately, the same cannot be said for her adult romance books, which I've enjoyed way less, as her adult romance books do go more open door, and the inner monologue and dialogue in some of these books is definitely not PG-13. So while her romance books get the green light, I would give a yellow light to trying her adult romance books. Okay, the second author that I have written down on the YA list is K.L. Walther. Note that I might be butchering that last name. Now, if you're someone who's into YA books with a heist or game element, you'll love this author. So far, I've read The Summer Broken Rules and sought DNF'd What Happens After Midnight, and I enjoy both of these. I still have no clue why I DNF'd and have yet to come back to the latter. Do not ask me why. I do this. Oh, and not to mention, her books are quite T-Swift coded if you're also a Swiftie. And unfortunately, I didn't get far enough into What Happens After Midnight to rate it overall or in terms of spice, but I would say The Summer of Broken Rules was barely above 1 chili pepper, as there's only one scene that occurs near the end of the book, which barely goes into any detail. Although I will say that while I appreciate more of the focus on the characters and the heister game element, I feel like K.L. Walther is the type of author where you don't need to read her whole backlist of titles to appreciate her as a writer, as upon researching her other titles, they all seem to have some similar elements to the two that I've already or almost read, so I really don't feel the need to read all of them. Okay, third author on this list is Jenny Han. Man, thinking about Jenny Han's books feels so OG, seeing as I originally read the Summer I Turned Pretty series as a teenager. Although she's definitely still in the spotlight a bit with the recent release of XO Kitty Season 2, I will say. Otherwise, I read To All the Boys, I believe shortly after the movies came out. Not to mention, I reread the Summer I Turned Pretty trilogy just last summer. And her books are honestly barely 1 chili pepper, as there are no scenes between the two mains in the Summer I Turned Pretty, from what I remember, and there's only one scene, sort of, that comes up in Always and Forever, which is the last book in the To All the Boys trilogy. The only caveat I have with Jenny Han is that she hasn't written anything new recently, and the only series I haven't read of hers is the Burn for Burn one, which she apparently co-wrote with someone named Siobhan Vivian. And when I looked up the summary for this one, I wasn't really interested in the whole revenge premise, and I never hear anyone talk about this series. So while I enjoyed Jenny Han for a while, it looks like I've reached the end of the road with her. Alright, fourth author on this list is Anne Liang. So, this is an author I became interested in after hearing about her book, I Hope This Doesn't Find You, which, funnily enough, was marketed as, quote, To All the Boys if Laura Jean wrote hate emails instead of love letters. FYI, I got that from the Goodreads description of this book. I'm gonna be honest, I remember not actually enjoying this book in general when I read it, and I can't fully remember why now. But a weird side note, I always end up rating books read solely on audio lower than I normally would, as I usually miss out on more of the plot and character development when I only listen on audio, which ends up leaving me very confused. But what I can say is, I'm pretty sure all the characters do in this book is kiss, and that's it. No spice is even implied, and I'm assuming that the rest of her YA books are also like this. And I know a couple people who really like Anne Liang, excuse me, especially because she also has written a few fantasy books. So I think I just have to give her another chance. Alright, so these next two authors are going to be more on the fantasy/romantasy end, starting with Kiera Cass. Funny story, when I initially saw a lot of booktubers trying out the Selection series, I told myself then and there that was something I was just never going to read. Yet, somehow, early on this year, I ended up binging and thoroughly enjoying the whole original trilogy. And I was surprised to discover that these books are essentially no spice, as it's not something that was necessarily talked about in other people's reviews at the time. Like, I would honestly rate these books half to 0.75 of a chili pepper if I had to. I am going to note that I feel like Kiera Cass might get boring for some people, including myself, as her stories all seem to take place in a royal/castle setting, which is definitely fun to read sometimes for a bit of escape, but not all the time in terms of romance. And last but not least, for the YA authors, we have Rebecca Ross. So, I saved one of my new best/favorite for last, as I simply adore the Divine Rivals duology as of recently. Or technically, I'm still enjoying it as we speak. Rebecca Ross really knows how to write atmospherically, as well as building that yearning desire between the two mains in a romance. And this duology in particular was practically no spice, with only one implied non-descriptive/non-graphic scene in the first book, as far as I can tell. As, like I implied, or noted, I'm still currently reading Ruthless Vows. I don't technically have a final spice rating yet, but I will preemptively stick with one chili pepper in terms of spice. And besides this duology, I've heard that her other duology, A River Enchanted, is also no to little spice, which it's safe to say is now higher up on my TBR currently. And besides the 6 that I just discussed, where I've read at least one of their books, there are some honorable mentions of authors I haven't read that I want to include, which are Stephanie Garber, Stephanie Perkins, Katie Cotugno, Jenna Evans Welch, Holly Bourne, and Hannah Nicole Mairer. Some mentionable books/series that each have written, which hopefully most of you have heard about, include the Carvel and Once Upon a Broken Heart series, Anna and the French Kiss series, 99 Days, the Love and Gelato series, It Only Happens in the Movies, and the Assistant to the Villain series. And one more honorable mention for YA is the first 3 to 4 books, apparently, of the Throne of Glass series by SJM are supposed to be no to little spice. However, the last 3 or so books do increase the level of spice as it ventures into new adult territory. Again, I haven't read this series yet, unfortunately, so this is based solely on my research and what I've heard from others, so take that as you will. But yes, I just wanted to include these ones as well, since they've all been highly talked about at one point in time in the online book community, so it's probably almost universally known for romance book lovers that most of these are all safe in terms of the spice level. And hopefully I will get around to reading some of them myself someday. Okay, first list done, let's move on to the list of new adult/adult romance authors. I have to say, this list is shorter than the YA section as it was difficult to find vetted closed-door authors. And again, this list is pretty much going to be closed door, not no spice, because let's be honest, as adults, this is a virtually impossible task to be asked of. Alright, first up on the adult romance author list, we have Sarah Adams. Now, personally, I feel like Sarah Adams is one of the top authors who pop up if you search up no spice or closed door romance authors. I know for sure when I started looking for closed door romances, she was the first one I came across that was highly talked about in the online book community. And I will say, I did find that in her books so far, the MCs will still have a lot of inner monologue that, let's just say, heavily fantasizes the other person and will go into semi-detail. But other than that, the actual scenes themselves are super closed door, as in you only get the lead up before the fade to black happens. And out of all her books, I've only read the first 2 books in the When in Rome series, but I immediately fell in love with her as a romance author overall, and I am currently reading her newest release, Beg, Borrow, or Steal. And best part is that if you are getting more into closed-door romance, she has a huge backlist that you can explore. So in addition to the When in Rome series, which I just mentioned, there's also the Cheat Sheet, It Happened in Nashville, and It Happened in Charleston series, which odds are I will likely end up reading at least the first book in all of these series. Okay, so the second author that I have in this list is Katherine Center. Now, this author is another huge name in recent years in terms of no spice/closed-door romance. Unfortunately, I've only read the rom-commer so far, and FYI, I didn't realize that it was slightly interconnected to The Bodyguard. But in terms of this book, while I didn't enjoy most of the storyline, this was actually potentially the least spicy adult romance I have read so far in my reading journey. Yes, the MC's intentions were definitely implied at times, but this book actually had 0 spice scenes, and the characters only went as far as kissing in the main storyline, which was quite surprising to me, as that just doesn't happen normally. Hopefully the same can be pretty much said for the rest of her backlist titles. And the third author that we have on this list is Annabel Monaghan. So it's safe to say that after some of the big names in romance like Emily Henry and Abby Jimenez, Annabel Monaghan has made her way near the top of my favorite romance authors ever list. Which is crazy, as I read her adult romance books all within last year. But yes, I'm a big fan of her, as her books always have so much more to offer than just the romance, and in terms of the spice, there's usually only 1 or 2 scenes at the most. But it's as fade to black as you can get in a closed-door romance. If I had to put a rating, I would say 1 to 1.5 chili peppers at the most, from what I remember reading, as she focuses on so many other elements of the romance and overall storyline in her books as well. And the last author that we have for the adult romance section is Miss Francine Rivers. So, the only book I've read of hers is Redeeming Love, which frankly, in terms of the writing style and literature overall, I didn't think was that great. In terms of biblical themes and it being loosely based on the story of Hosea and Gomer, I thought it was an interesting piece of Christian fiction. And seeing as she is a Christian fiction author, it feels safe to give her the green light, as I don't remember anything explicit in Redeeming Love. However, I do remember some heavy content coming up where they did imply that Angel/Sarah was sexually abused or assaulted, so that is something to keep in mind with her books, potentially. And that wraps up the list of adult closed-door romance authors. Now, in addition to all the authors that I've given the green light, I wanted to have a list of authors that are yellow or red light and would either highly avoid or honestly avoid entirely. And this is not only because of the actual explicit scenes themselves, but also due to language used to describe said certain scenes or in the character's dialogue. I'm gonna be really honest, and I don't know how others feel too, but when a book describes 10 to hundreds of times about his or his, I feel like that is where I draw the line in terms of what is acceptable for me to read, and just what I want to be reading on a regular basis. And I'm probably gonna bleep those words out, but you should all know what I mean. Anyways, let's move on to the final list of authors to avoid. Now, the first author that I want to talk about on the avoid list is Christina Lauren. Now, this author is one I don't talk a lot about on the podcast, as besides Love in Other Words, I haven't enjoyed a single one of their rom-com novels. And that is mostly because of the dialogue between the two MCs that usually occurs in their rom-coms. I don't know if it's just me, but I'll find it will be very random scenes where certain words are just thrown into the conversation. Like, it won't even be when they're alone, but they'll be eating at a restaurant or some outdoor setting, and the FMC will casually mention something, and I'll get thrown off. Side note, listen to the Paradise Problem on audio, and you'll find out what I mean. It's quite sad, to be honest, because Love in Other Words is a beloved 5-star romance for many others, including myself in the online book community. But the rest of their books in general, plus the amount of spice in each, I have to give a yellow light, and I'm unsure how many of their backlist titles I should even read at this point. And the second author that we have on this avoid list is Tessa Bailey. Okay, so this author I'm definitely giving the red light. I read only 1.5 books by her, counting 2 novellas and half of a full-length novel, and I cannot stand her writing in terms of the spice, but more so, again, the dialogue between the MCs. And while I haven't read that many of her books, I feel safe to say this, as most of my other reader friends would agree that Tessa Bailey is not their type of romance author, and these are also people who prefer more substance and emotional connection in their romance novels. And I think what usually gets me about her books is that there seems to be a pattern of insta-lust when the MCs first meet, which is heavily emphasized. And I'm not even joking. It'll literally be the first time that the characters are meeting, and all they can think about is what they want to do to each other when they're alone. And it only progresses and usually gets worse from there. So yes, even in general, but again, also due to the amount of heavy spice, Tessa Bailey is an author I'm taking a hard pass on. Okay, the next author on this list is Ali Hazelwood. Some of you might be surprised that Ali Hazelwood is on this list, as you've probably heard me rave about the love hypothesis. And as I'm speaking, I can't remember what episode that I talked about the love hypothesis, but anyways, I'll put it in the notes or something if I remember. And it's true, I still love Ali Hazelwood as a writer. On the spice end, however, I am giving her the yellow light, as her books do tend to have at least one scene, or there's more than one scene. Just anything that is in her books gets more descriptive and contains colorful language, let's say. And a note that besides the love hypothesis, I've actually read Cruel Winter with You and Two Can Play, both of which are novellas, and the latter I thoroughly did not enjoy because it was on the spicy end. But she is an author that, again, I've heard universally is known for a moderate level of spice, I want to say. So unless you really like her as a writer like I do, I would give caution. And the last author that we have on the avoid list is Sarah J. Maas, i.e. SJM. This might shock some listening that the only book I've technically read by SJM is the first ACOTAR book, and I've yet to continue the series, although I'm hoping to rectify that this year. Anyways, that one surprisingly is more on the tame side, but I've heard that the spice level supposedly intensifies as the series goes on. In addition, I've heard that Crescent City also gets spicy. So in general, besides some of the Throne of Glass series, I would advise caution and give a yellow light for reading SJM. Having said that, I personally want to continue ACOTAR as the storyline was quite intriguing to me even in the first book, and if it comes down to it, I feel alright skipping whatever I'm not comfortable with in order to enjoy the rest of the story. Hey readers, I hope you're enjoying the episode so far, and hear me out before you hit skip. I'm so grateful for all my listeners who are with me on this reading journey, and I'd like to ask that if you haven't yet, please leave a rating and review as it helps others find the podcast. Also, please consider supporting the podcast financially as it helps me bring you more exciting content, and you'll get some extras like bonus and subscriber-only episodes, early access to new episodes, and much more. The link to donate will be in the show notes below, or you can go to buymeacoffee.com/fullybookedpod. Thank you so much again for choosing to listen to Fully Booked, and now back to the episode. Now, I fully realize this list is not at all comprehensive, as there's a whole world of spice and smut out there, which I am, sadly, but not surprisingly, very unfamiliar with. However, I mostly did my best to pick authors for this list that I have read at least one book of theirs, so at least I had a little bit of an idea of what their writing style and, everything about their books in general is like. I also just feel like it's fairly easy to look up certain authors or books that are considered smutty, as certain themes, hyper-specific tropes, settings, etc. will usually pop up, and you can easily make a note to avoid these. Not to mention, the smut side of book talk can also be used as a good storing guide. So with that concludes my entire list of no spice / closed door author recommendations. Hope you all enjoyed today's episode, and that it added a bit of no spice into your life. Because no spice was kind of the point of today. Anyways, I'd love to hear which of these authors is your favorite for no spice or closed door, or if you haven't read any of them, which one is your most anticipated next author. But with all that being said, as usual, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you back here for episode 26. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope you were able to take away something, and be sure to follow the podcast for more bookish content. Until next time, stay fully booked, and I'll talk to you soon.